Rachel here for BalticStitches.com, and today's video we will be talking about braided cast-on. We are going to discuss the Latvian technique of doing braided cast-on, and we're also going to touch on the Estonian technique for braided cast-on because both countries do it differently. So we're going to discuss both today. Get your needles, get your yarn, and let's get started. Okay, so I have my two yarns today, and we're going to start with a slip knot with our two yarns together. Again, you are not going to count this slip knot as a first stitch. It's just to get the yarns onto your needles. That's what we did with two color cast on. It's the same with braided cast on. For ease for today's video, I'm using thicker yarns and I'm using straight needles. You may be using thinner yarns and double pointed needles, in which case that's fine. I'm just using thicker yarns so you can see better today. Okay, so I have my slip knot, I have my yarns on my needle. Again, I'm not counting the slip knot as the first stitch. It's just to get the yarn onto the needle. I'm going to drop this after I do my cast on. So I pulled out extra yarn from my balls of yarn, so I have that because these two yarns are going to twist together as I'm casting on. I'm putting the light color over my thumb and my dark color over my index finger, just like long tail, just like two color cast on that we did last time. But there's an extra step, and that's what we're going to do together here slowly. So I'm going to put on a dark stitch first, so I'm going to go ahead and grab or scoop from my thumb, twist around with the dark, back through my thumb and off. Now this is where it changes to make the braid. I'm going to take my light color, I'm going to bring it up and over to the back, and now my dark color's on my thumb and my light color's on my index, and I'm going to go ahead and cast on stitch number 2, and you can see there it's a white stitch. I'm going to let go, my dark color comes up and over my light is now on my thumb, dark's back on my index. I'm going to cast on that stitch, stop, twist it around, light goes to back, dark comes front, and my next stitch is on. Stop, and as I'm doing this, you will notice I've got a twist going on back here behind. Light goes to back, dark comes front, and I'm going to keep doing that however many stitches to cast on, not counting that slip knot here, not counting that loop. Stop, dark goes to back, light to front, and I'm just going to keep going. Now if you cast on tightly, you might want to hold two needles together as you're casting on to give a looser edge. But because I'm using thicker yarn and a thicker straight needle, I just have one. For DPNs, for socks, for edges of socks, I usually use two needle cast on. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing this a few times here, and then I'm going to show you how you can get the twist out. Okay, so now we have our stitches cast on, every other color, and I'm going to turn it over and you can see this is where the braid part comes in. You can see the nice braid traveling up here, up on my edge. So that gives a nice, just a really nice pretty edge. That's different than two color cast on, because the two color cast on you had one color stitches on your needle and you had one color chained or braided on the other end. This way I've got every other. Now you'll also notice my yarns all got tangled up here. So I want to untangle these before I go on. I'm a person that doesn't like my yarns tangled, it drives me crazy. So I figured out a way to get this undone, and that is I'm going to hold up my yarn, and this may or may not get in camera frame, that's okay. I'm going to drop my needle. I'm going to take my yarns and I'm going to let it hang and the needle will spin the twist right out. Like that. And then I can get started with my knitting. Now, one thing to note about this braided cast on, usually you will have, let's see, how do I show this? Usually you will have this side on the outside. This side would be on the inside of my mitten or my sock. You can see the bumps on the outs would be like the inside of your sock or mitten. This would be my outside. So this outside part would be row 1. This inside part would probably be row 2 in your pattern. It's just something to take note. For the Latvian technique, here's a little bit of history on it from some of my knitting resources, and also some knit examples to show you what it looks like. A Latvian braid, which is very similar to the braided cast on, is done later after the cast on. And on these little mittens, this shows a perfect example of a regular cast on here, and then like 1 or 2 rows in, the braided, the Latvian braid was then knit on there. That looks much different than these little mittens, which has the braid right on the edge, and you can see the difference. This little mitten used a braided cast on. This bigger mitten used a Latvian braid after the cast on, and you can see the edges are very different. This book is a wonderful, wonderful book reference to learn how to do some of the techniques for Latvian mittens and socks and the different looks that they give. I wanted to show you in the book these little mittens here. You can see the edge is a braided cast on. Looks much different than the mitten here. Oh, actually that's a braided cast on too. So then if you look at this mitten, you can see this one has the Latvian braid later after the cast on, and the fringe is down here. Here's the Latvian braid. The second way you can get a braided cast on is the Estonian technique. And again, we're going to start with a slip knot just to get our yarns onto our needles. We're not going to count this slip knot as a first stitch. Now, this technique that I'm going to show you is for people that do a lot of knitted cast-ons. This is going to be very familiar to you versus the long tail cast-on. This is more of a knitted cast-on technique. So I'm going to go into the first stitch, and remember this first stitch is not really going to count. It's everything subsequent. So I'm going to start dark and then I'm going to go light. So I'm going to pick up my dark yarn. I'm going to do the wrap. I'm going to bring it forward and put it back on my needle. That's number 1. I'm going to go into this. I'm going to get my second stitch. I'm going to always twist it in the same direction. So I want to twist it this way. I'm going to knit that one through and put it back on my needle. Now I'm going to go for the dark again. I'm going to always twist it around this way to the top, and I have my dark back on my needle. Twist it around. There's my white. Twist it around. There's my red. And what this method does is you have a little bit of a different edge. It's more elastic than the long tail, but it does produce the same effect. So I'm just going to go on and keep casting on a few more of these, and we'll look at the effect at the bottom. Okay, so I cast it on, or knit on a couple more stitches so you can see the effect at the bottom. And again, we have a braid, It's not quite as thick as the long tail cast on braid, but I still have the braid effect on the bottom, doing it the Estonian way. Okay, another word you might hear other than braided cast on or a Latvian braid would be called a plait. And Folk Mittens by Marcia Lewandowski is a wonderful resource with patterns of different styles of mittens, but you will see similar techniques. In here they call it a plait. And I'll show you an example. This one mitten right here pattern, this is the Lopi Mittens. This is a plait on the edge of this mitten. It's not a braid, it's just a plait. And you would start on with a braided cast on. Now for the Estonian technique, I found it in this book. And again, I don't read Estonian, but you can read pictures and you can read graphs to figure it out. I looked at this picture and I realized that they were not doing a braided cast on like I was doing for the Latvian patterns that I have done in the past. Again, I can see that this is a twisted cast on, just like my little tiny Latvian mini mitten that you had seen previously, but they are not doing it long tail. This is the result on the after you're done, but what they're doing is they're knitting it on every other color. I hope you enjoyed this video to show you how to do braided cast on and a little bit of history behind the technique. If you have any questions or if you're not sure about the information that I've given you here, please comment below. I will try to answer all comments with questions as quickly as I can. Thanks! Wait for it.